Well, hi, I'm Jason Shannon, author of the Zimmer Insurgency. The book has been out for about 7 weeks now, self-published through Lulu.com, and it is the story of a woman in the 22nd century that sparks an uprising or an insurrection against a corrupt government in the West. It's a political thriller science fiction novel. You know, I'm not entirely sure. This was written in two separate drafts. The first draft was written back in 2009, and I don't recall how long I spent on it. It was short back then, it was only about the length of a novella, and it was a part of a larger series, so when the series fell apart, the Zimmer Insurgency wound up in the trash right along with it. The second draft took me about 6 months. In that time, I more or less doubled the length of it. I had to cut it away from the larger series and added a whole bunch of new stuff to make it work. What I did was I cut away the stuff that was the story arcs going nowhere, and I just added in some of the material that I've dabbled in other writing or that I have an interest in. I just started chucking the stuff into the text, and that more or less wound up being pirates, the Taiping, and boobs. I'll be honest, the thriller aspect of this comes from 24, that old Fox show that gave Dick Cheney false impressions about how the intelligence community works. Beyond that, I would say the primary influence is probably Alan Steele. He's an American science fiction author that for the past decade or so has been working on the Coyote series. And in the first book to the Coyote series, Coyote itself features a group of dissidents in the United States that plot to hijack a starship to the new world of Coyote. I'm not going to say I ripped him off entirely. I like to think I didn't do that too much. My story is actually quite different than his, but there's no denying that's an influence. Well, I've already mentioned Alan Steele. He's probably my favorite science fiction author. Apart from him, I like David Gunn, who was writing the Death's Head series before he vanished off the face of the earth. I've recently gotten into David Wingrove's Chung Kuo recast, which is a sort of a Chinese science fiction. That'll be an interesting one to watch. I'm excited to read more of that. Outside of science fiction, there's George R.R. Martin's Song of Fire and Ice Game of Thrones series. I like American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I like Australian satire author Max Berry. The Flashman series by George MacDonald Fraser, and I've recently gotten into Guy Gabriel Kay again. He's a Canadian fantasy author that I've read once before, and I'm picking him up again. There's some lesbian ass-licking in there, if you want to count that.
So you're not even going to get into the whole psychedelic breast milk thing?
Well, that'll come up a little later, but yeah, you don't go from nothing to lesbian ass-licking. There's a bit of a transitory period in there. Yeah, you could say there's a sexual overtone in the book, sure. They just come to me. That there's no magic formula for conjuring them. They just happen. Every writer I know says the same thing. It's just that there's no magic to it. You either have it or you don't. Research. I'd say probably a good third of the man hours I put into any writing project is research. Some of it's fairly simple to do. I can go online for the simple things like finding the distance between Auckland and Panama, or the names of famous pirates I can parody. But some of it you have to go to more scholarly sources for. The Taiping, for example, although the Wikipedia article is fairly accurate, I nonetheless went to a more scholarly source for. Luckily, I'd already read a couple of books on that, so I didn't have to reread them. It was just a matter of going back to them as a reference. The Church of the Taiping is a fundamentalist puritanical offshoot of Protestantism that you could say was founded by the prophet Feng and his adherents. Feng himself was a messianic insurrectionist against the Confucian Shao dynasty of China, which was fought by the Feng Rebellion, led to the Feng Rebellion, and which resulted in numerous war crimes on either side. Feng was eventually apprehended and is now living in custody in Taipei, Taiwan, but his church is still growing and has sparked a deep divide, both religiously and politically, with his adherents and his detractors. For those that know their history, the Fang Rebellion is a rehash of the 19th century Taiping Rebellion in southern and central China. This is probably my favorite period in history in which to read. The rebellion, or the movement, was founded by Hong Xiuquan, who, after a delirious dream state, proclaimed himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ and fought an almost jihadist or crusader-like war against not just the Qing dynasty of the day, but against all established Confucian society. At the end of it, it was about 30 million dead, which is about twice the death toll of World War I. It was also incredibly puritanical, which I depict in the book as well. The Puritanism would be somewhere to the scale of Rick Santorum's Wet Dream, which ironically enough he'd then be beheaded for having had. All things sexual were banned by punishment of death. Even having sex with your wife could get you beheaded, and you'd be lucky if you were beheaded. I have a strange fascination with the Taiping period, and I've read more than a couple books on it. So when it came time to beef up the Zimmer Insurgency by adding a little bit more material, the Taiping seemed like an easy choice to make. I remember reading an article somewhere along the line about improvements being made and speculated about with maglev technology, which predicted that if they get the right technology in there, you could have maglev trains traveling at upwards of 6,000 miles an hour, which would be about the equivalent of going from New York to LA on your lunch break, or going from Boston to Beijing in just over 2 hours. I don't normally write far future science fiction, not this is too far, but I usually either attempt things that are either post-apocalyptic or that are in the near future. So I don't really have to envision the future a whole lot in my writing. When it came to this novel, when I had to do that, I just wound up going back to some of these articles I read and throwing in everything I could to make it seem as futuristic as I could. Yes, very much so. I think that issues like climate change and peak oil are very serious, that we as a society aren't doing enough to take seriously. China, as I understand it, is starting to take this seriously, and they're investing wholesale into things like green technology. But apart from just disposable energy, the more serious issue lies with climate change. We exist on a climatic knife edge here. I'm not buying farmland in the Falklands type scared, but it does have me worried. Well, I think the most immediate audience would be science fiction fans. I think there's a lot in there that sci-fi fans would like. But it also is written as a thriller, so I think thriller fans would enjoy it as well. It does have a certain amount of political intrigue, so if you've got political leanings, you might enjoy it as well. I like to hope that it doesn't come off as a diatribe, that my writing style is more sarcastic and hopefully mutes soapbox manifestos. There's a phenomenon within liberalism that I call the uber-liberal, and that others have called the ultra-progressive, or the PC police, or the raging feminist. And I wanted to, one, call these people out for the waste of oxygen that they are, and two, since I'm manifestly not a conservative, I wanted to make sure I'm not grouped in with these people in the way I'm perceived. Now, I mean, let me make it clear, I am a bleeding heart, liberal, progressive, feminist, left-wing, radical revolutionary. I believe that abortion should be legal in all instances, that prostitution should be openly advertised on billboards, and that cocaine should be available for sale in pharmacies. I believe that sodomy should be taught in high school sex ed classes, and that we should abolish the institution of marriage as a legal institution. The artificial uterus should be developed to help alleviate the burden of pregnancy from women. I don't believe, for example, that nice guys are some type of militant group plotting against women, or that any expression, or lack thereof, of male sexuality is tantamount to rape. I don't believe that any sexualization or fetishization of breasts is misogynist, or that Pornhub's $25,000 donation to breast cancer charities is the sexualization of cancer. These are people that have no sense of humor. These are people that write scathing reviews of Glee because there's no little people on the cast. These are people that want to see sexual selectiveness left in the dustbin of history, the scale of 1 to 10 abolished, and live for the day when men will show enough preferentialism between a supermodel on one hand and a woman who's had her face ripped off by a baboon on the other. These are people that think that Seth MacFarlane's "We Saw Your Boobs" song at the Oscars is the most misogynist thing since Genghis Khan. These are people that think that Michelle Obama's Healthy Snacks initiative is fat shaming. I mean, we can't even encourage healthy eating, for fuck's sake. What's next? We can't encourage literacy because rural Mongolian nomad children might not have the same opportunities to learn how to read? What do you mean, if it existed? I spent the past decade looking for it. Would I be an addict? Well, I think the act of shooting up would be more enjoyable than the high. I want the needle more than I want the heroin inside it. Lindsay Fonseca, Emma Stone, Emma Watson, I think it's fairly obvious I have a type, and Emilia Clarke, just because of Game of Thrones. And you know what? If Rose Leslie does a topless scene this year, then she'll make the list too. Yeah, I'm 26. I don't have kids, and I don't want them. This was the safe bet. This gives me control of my reproductive destiny. The entire thing actually is covered in the collection Being Fruitful Without Multiplying, Stories and Essays from Around the World. The story of my vasectomy is in here, and if you want, if you have an interest in this type of thing, you can check it out. It's available on Amazon. Whenever you're dealing with a haze of details that needs to be added in without advancing the story a whole lot, I find it helps to add in what I call a heavy hitter. Heavy hitters are the most powerful force in all of fiction. They're the elite Black Ops Marine that goes behind enemy lines, the world-renowned mercenary, the expert assassin. They're ruthless, merciless, and malicious, and they're ominous. All the characters walk on eggshells around them, and those that don't are usually about to die. They can force a convolution of character threads and storylines to get off their ass and actually move the story somewhere. And I find that really helps to advance the storyline, especially in the beginning when it's needed. He's asking about a sequel, and he's not the only one. There's been a few others. There might be one someday. I have drawn up plans for one. Well, there's no guarantee that there'll be one. I'm not currently working on it. I'm working on something else just because I need a break for a while. What I can say is that the story of Kayla Zimmer is done. Her storyline will not come back into this. If there is a sequel, it will take place about a year or so after the events of the Zimmer Insurgency on Earth. Currently what I have is a Chinese Weijun guard on assignment, and it gets into the same political intrigue with Premier Petrova, President Garcia, Vincent Halverson, and the rest. So there might be one, but I wouldn't hold your breath for it. Well, there's a lot of story to cover here that takes place all over the world. Truthfully, I prefer to write first person because it's far more intimate with the character, but that's just not possible with the story I'm dealing with. What I've done here is I've used George R.R. Martin's style with viewpoint characters in each particular scene. So you still get the characters' thoughts and their feelings, their tone, but it still follows them in third person, just jumping around a lot to cover it. So again, the novel is The Zimmer Insurgency by Jason Shannon, self-published through Lulu.com. So if you have an interest, check it out. I am working on a website, but it's currently under construction, so if you want to get hold of me for now, you can go to my Goodreads profile, goodreads.com, Jason Shannon, and all the information's there.